Inflation is the ravage, it's the burglar of retirement. The chances now somebody living to 100 is 1 in 4. People don't realise what it is that they've got.
Financial advisor Peter Lawlor has over 3 decades of experience with defined benefit schemes.
Understand the value of that guaranteed income. Don't look at the transfer value. In our industry, we have too much jargon. My daughter's in the NHS. She's trained to be an anaesthetist, and she says, it's very, very confusing.
She knows how to knock people out, not crunch the numbers. Yeah. We've got you here today to talk about defined benefit, DB schemes. I actively avoid talking about them because they're so heavily regulated, they're so complicated and so valuable. And I have no experience in them, to be blunt, that I've always been just like, seek professional advice. And in general, you probably should hold on to that thing because it's gold plated. We've put questions to our audience, and we want to go through this quite systematically today if we can, so that people can understand what they are, what the benefits are, what they can do with them. And we want to start with a question if we can. Do you want to read that one out there?
Yeah,
you got
time
it.
to shine. One of our audience members wrote this in. He said, I have a DB pension and I feel like the education behind them is non-existent. I didn't even know it was a DB pension before watching your videos. I know a lot of my colleagues feel the same.
And it's the terminology. It's in our industry, we have too much jargon.
Yeah.
Okay, or acronyms for various things. Again, it's a pain. So a DB pension, a defined benefit, can come in a number of guises. The key thing is there is an element of guarantee. That's the most important thing. So for members of the public, if they have their annual benefit statement and it says in there that it is guaranteed, then what that means is that element of the pension is not subject to investment performance in the stock market. All of that investment performance, all of that risk is taken on by the employer. Because what a DB pension is actually an employer giving an undertaking that upon your retirement, I will guarantee to pay you X. And X might be 1/80th for each year of service, 1/60th for each year of service, 1/45th for each year of service.
1/60th of their income
at retirement.
At retirement age.
Or for the number of years they've worked. So, for example, if I am accruing, saving pension benefits with the employer on a 1/60th basis, and I worked for 20 years, when I come to retire, depending upon what the definition of final salary is, I will have 1/3 of my final salary as a pension, guaranteed for the rest of my life. And the key point is, in that situation, part of that pension will be subject to increases with inflation. Now, you might turn around and say, oh, Pete, that's a load of garbage. Inflation for the next 12 months is only 1.7. That's what's been the rise in public sector pensions, which we'll come on to later, I'm sure, is 1.7. Last year it was 6.7, and the year before that it was 10.1, when, not being politically incorrect, Liz Truss put a foot in it, So when she put a foot in it, most people were cheering because it went up to 10.1, and then therefore that guaranteed that the inflationary increases for the April of the following year was 10.1, then 6.7, and now it's down to 1.7. So it is really, really important for the public to understand that when they're looking at their annual benefit statement, they understand what it is that they've got.
So if a scheme was 80ths, realistically, that person's never going to earn their full salary because they would need to work at that place for 80 years, wouldn't they, to get their full salary at retirement. So if they did 40 years, they might get half.
Yeah, that's right.
Which would be like if they worked from 20 to 60 at the same organisation.
Correct. And that's traditionally, going back years ago, some people did. They went in some places went in as a boy and came out as a man much, much later, or a girl and coming out as a woman, from that basis. But yeah, so 40/80ths, of service would give you half of whatever the definition of final pensionable earnings might be. Now, for example, that might be your last year of earnings before you retire. Could be 1 in the last 5. It could be 3 in the last 5. It could be an average of that. It could be anything as defined by the scheme rules. Just on that as well, there's another type of pseudo final salary scheme that's come about now, because they're also called defined benefit or final salary scheme. and that is a career average revalued earnings scheme, or a CARE scheme, as some people call it, CARE. So a CARE scheme is basically that each year you earn a fraction of your salary, your pensionable earnings, as a pension, and then that is revalued, and that's put in a box and revalued every year. And then at retirement, all the boxes are added up, and that's your pension, which is different to 1/60th of a future pension that I have.
Yeah, the DB, the defined benefit, the benefit you receive is predefined. Defined contribution, how much you end up, is defined by your contributions and investment performance over the period.
Correct.
Who's most likely to have one of these DB or final salary schemes in your experience?
So a lot of public service people, so the Army, Navy, Air Force, civil servants, teachers, NHS, all have defined benefit final salary schemes with some sort of guarantee. There's recently been a lot of changes within that environment because of what is something called the McLeod judgment. So the McLeod judgment was basically that the government back in 2015 said, "Oh, we can't afford this. We better change some of this." And they changed everyone into a scheme, which was a career average scheme, which was less of an accrual, and extended the retirement age to state pension age, or age 67, whichever was the later. A judge called Victoria McLeod, and she only stopped sitting last year, took the government to court and said, this is discriminating.
Moving the goalposts is not fair.
Yes, because you've let the older people stay in the old final salary scheme, but the younger people have been moved into this career average scheme, and it's less favourable. And the Court of Appeal agreed with her, and the government had to have to unravel everything and put people back in the position they would have been had this discrimination not taken place on the 1st of April 2015. 1.1 million people are impacted in the NHS, 1.1 million. And the cost of it all is just phenomenal.
The admin cost. Like they're trying to save money and they just end up costing the taxpayer loads in admin by moving the goalposts around.
That's correct. And in some cases, there have been overpayment in taxes, and they're being refunded.
The one thing that I think that people don't understand about the public sector is the pension is a way of competing with the private sector in terms of pay, right? So the public sector, my friends who are doctors could earn a lot more money doing other types of jobs, or even just working in the private medical sector. But their pension, they're all saying, well, I get such a good pension, it's like a real pull for me. So if they start messing with that, the public sector becomes a lot less attractive, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And in fairness to him, take my hat off to him, Jeremy Hunt in the budget of 2023 changed quite a considerable amount of things towards the NHS. So traditionally, people arrived at age 60 in the old final salary scheme could take their benefits, but were restricted on what they could come back and how they could work. But because waiting lists increased dramatically, obviously post-COVID and so forth, they decided to do away with that. And now what happens now is that we have occupational drawdown now within the NHS, which is basically that those people in the 1995 or 2008 scheme can take their benefits, go back to work, still work on the same basis as they were last Friday, as long as they reduce their pensionable earnings by 10% for the next 12 months. So in theory, you could be a 60-year-old doctor. I'm going to age you a little bit, okay? Only a little bit, but a 60-year-old doctor, and you could take your benefits, go back to work, and as long as your pensionable earnings have reduced by 10%, you can have your salary and your pension for the same job, okay? And you can continue to have benefits under the 2015 scheme, which you then can take at your 67th birthday.
Do you find that tends to be a good deal for most people that are offered that?
I had a meeting with a doctor client that we were dealing with and have been dealing with, and last Friday, and he will be taking his benefits, which are £74,000 a year guaranteed pension. that guaranteed pension is index linked on a non-restrictive basis for CPI. So, for example, I go back to my 10.1.
Sorry, what's CPI?
Oh, so sorry. Consumer Price Index. So that is what the increases by every year. Now I know what the X is for, boys. Thank you.
Yeah, we didn't eject you out. We didn't eject you out of the room.
So from that perspective, it's unlimited. Whereas some final salary schemes, so members of other final salary schemes, generally speaking, it would be Consumer Price Index, open brackets, CPI, up to a maximum, or
there you go. The retail price index. Yeah, the RPI.
up to a maximum of 5%. So that is restricted. So, or even 2.5% consumer price index. So some of that, but whereas in the public sector, and the point you made a couple of moments ago is absolutely valid. It was and traditionally has been a way of rewarding those people for working, inverted commas, in the public sector.
So is it just public sector workers that have DB schemes?
No, a number of individuals will have DB schemes on a historic basis. So the BBC has a defined benefit scheme. Various building societies and banks will have defined benefit schemes, but it may be that they aren't open to further accrual, savings in those DB schemes. Whereas the public sector, they do have defined benefit guaranteed pensions.
I had a teacher, I believe, that approached me and asked me a question I couldn't advise on, where they seemed to be implying that the school body that they worked for were offering them a defined contribution scheme with a high contribution rate if they signed away the benefit to their DB scheme. So they basically said they're offering me like 12% match if I waive my DB. Do you think that's a good deal? That's what they asked me. I was like, look, go seek professional advice.
Yeah.
But
So what's happened anecdotally is that a lot of public schools, have had issues with the funding, and obviously with the impact of VAT on the fees in earlier on this year. It's been significant. As an issue for them. So obviously, a lot of those were part of the teachers' pension scheme. So they were being asked by the teachers' pension scheme to pay in money as a percentage of the entire payroll. That was quite onerous, to say the least. So a way around that would be, well, if I know that 12% per annum, each year, that if I pay in, I can keep control of that because I can control what salaries go up by as well. Whereas under a final salary scheme, defined benefit pension scheme, a professional known as an actuary calculates what the contribution levels need to be in theory, 3 years. Now, the problem is that if investment performance within the fund, or if there are certain assumptions that they've historically made were wrong, then the employer is asked to increase their funding. Well, that becomes a bit of a headache for an employer from that perspective. So what some of these schools have come up with is that they've turned around and said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll put in 12% or 15%, but you only have to put in 6, don't worry, right? Or 7% or whatever it might be. And we'll put that in. Now, it sounds a lot because, putting in 20% of your salary sounds a lot of money. But obviously, that is a physical amount of money that goes in. And as you've already said, that is subject to investment return, charges. It's more complicated. Whereas the DB pension, if I keep on working, I know that I will have X amount, 1/60th, 1/80th, whatever it might be, each year of my final salary. The other thing about the teacher's pension scheme is that there are different definitions of final pensionable earnings, and they give the better of. And one of those is the consecutive 3 years within the last 10 years of working. So it is.
So the teachers have a better definition of working than nurses.
So it varies. So each scheme has its own definition of pensionable earnings.
What does that 3 in 10 mean?
So consecutive 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. In 10, what were your best 3 years of pensionable earnings?
Your highest
and
salary.
then the average of that. Yeah. Okay. So it might not be 1 year, and then it really is quite important to understand what the definition is.
What if you're part-time throughout that period, though?
So again, it'll depend upon what the definition is within scheme. I apologise about being a little bit blasé about it and vague. But if I use the NHS as an example, they provide a whole-time equivalent. But it would be for our audience, individuals, to check to see what would happen before they reduce their pensionable salary. I would err on the side of caution before you think about doing that, because it will be dependent upon what the scheme rules say.
So a little quiz for you. Do you know what any of these things mean? ISO 27001, SOC 2, the EU AI Act, or DORA? If not, no worries, but if you do, it probably means you work for a company that cares about security and compliance. If you're a growing business today, you have to prove that you comply with security and privacy frameworks like these, and GDPR, so that you can land big deals and grow your business. But the problem is, achieving and then maintaining compliance with these frameworks is time-consuming and complicated. This is where our partner Vanta can help your business. Vanta automates up to 90% of the work and 85% of the associated costs for in-demand frameworks. So if you want to prove that you're secure and compliant, check out Vanta. You can also get $1,000 off Vanta if you go to vanta.com/makingmoney. So that's vanta.com/makingmoney for $1,000 off, and there's a link in the description for you.
Is there a different age for when you can receive your DB pension to defined contribution pension? Are they all the same age?
So the scheme rules will dictate the age at which you can take benefits. For example, in the NHS, the 1995 scheme has a retirement age of age 60. The 2008 scheme has a retirement age of 65. And the 2015 scheme is a retirement age of 65 or state pension age, whichever is the later. But each scheme will have its own unique rules. I've seen retirement ages of 62. I've seen retirement ages of 63. It just really depends upon what the scheme rules say.
Will people in that have multiple schemes have multiple retirement ages then? So they could have one that kicks in at 60, one at 60?
And that's what's happening at the moment in the NHS, yeah. So going back earlier on, we spoke about being able to do occupational drawdown in the NHS at the moment. So you can take your 1995 benefits at age 60 and continue to have benefits payable to you and accruing and saving benefits in the 2015 scheme all the way through to the later retirement age. However, there's going to be a change in legislation in 2028, whereby the minimum pension age is increasing to 57. It'll be 70 by the time you get to.
Yeah.
So it's going to increase to 57. So back in 2010, it increased from 50 to 55. And in 2028, it's increasing so that it is 10 years below state pension age.
It's scandalous that they drag it up with the state pension age.
Yeah,
in
so
my
that's
opinion.
what they,
like give me access. It's my pension. Like the state pension, I can understand, but dragging that up with it, I think is.
It is the fear of ruin and being reliant upon the state. That's the big thing about it from that perspective. But it is really important to understand that although the pension might become payable earlier, these schemes just aren't that generous and say, oh, we'll let you have that and we'll pay you the same amount as we would when you were 60 years of age. No, don't work like that. What they would do is they would reduce the amount of money that would be paid. It's what is referred to as an actuarial reduction. So basically, they will calculate what the pension that would be payable potentially and make a deduction from the retirement age to the age that you would take. So for example, if you took it 5 years early, we'll make a reduction of 20% because obviously the scheme is going to be paying it that longer, much longer to you. And that's a really important aspect as well. So as far as ages are concerned, yes, you can take it early, but sometimes as well, scheme rules may insist that you've left the employment as well. So it just varies on scheme rules.
And I mean, we had a question from someone, we got it here. Is it Mark? Yeah, Mark wrote, how can I retire early on a DB scheme? And I think what you're hinting at there is if you take the DB scheme, well, not hinting, you're saying that if you take it early, you're likely going to get a worse overall payment. Would you find that you end up in the same position as a net position if you live like to an average life expectancy, or is it quite a big impact?
So if you think about it, and it'll vary, but I can give you an example because this is quite a common theme. Okay, so two of you, right? Okay, so you take your pension at age 55, and you've had it reduced. Okay, and that pension comes into payment. So let's call it 10 grand just for discussion purposes. Okay, and every year that 10 grand is increased by consumer price index. Okay, on the other hand, you've waited until age 60. So your pension might start off at £13,000 or £14,000, but you've already had 5 years worth of payments. So there will be a crossover point at a future date.
I'm 50k ahead of him.
Potentially,
but he gets 3k more.
Yeah, so there'll be a crossover point at a future date depending upon how long you live, as you rightly say. Now, what that then comes down to is individual choice. What's your health like? What do you think? How long do you think you're going to live for? So there is a crossover point, but the key thing is it depends upon personal circumstances.
And how much do you need? Like, why keep working for 5 years if you're like, that's enough and I can go and I want to retire? Also, stocks and shares ISA, I think is like a really good product to supplement these kind of DB schemes potentially. You could focus on building up a stocks and shares ISA and the flexibility that has to bridge the gap between when you want to stop and when your DB scheme kicks in or whatever.
The big thing I'd be saying to anybody, and we do it every time, is what is the situation regarding your state pension? The state pension now, being triple locked as well. How long that will last for, who knows?
We won't get it. I mean, I think the theme is we won't get it. But people now, not with all of this stuff, we'll retire at 90.
Yeah, but it's the amount that will be paid. If you look at a joint household, somebody in a civil partnership or a husband and wife or whatever it might be, okay, that is nearly £23,000 a year coming into the household. Okay, allegedly. You require £30,000 to £35,000 as a couple to have a decent living in retirement. But if you've got 22,000, you'll need to bridge that then 13,000. Does the DB or what other assets can bridge that for you from that point of view? And you're spot on. It's down to personal circumstance. If I've had a guts full and I've had enough of working, you got to have something to get out of bed for in the morning, haven't you? And if that drive goes, then alternatively, the winters over here, they are pretty dreary, aren't they? I don't blame people for going to Spain or Granada or whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in this room.
Oh, yeah.
I'm in England. I'm not going anywhere. Everyone else is like, oh, Spain's looking real nice. Maybe that's an age thing. You
think so?
Yeah, I don't know.
What, a young age or
maybe
old
it's
age?
a UK thing. I don't know.
Maybe it's a UK thing.
I mean, it's sunny here now. No one's talking about leaving anymore, are they? But I feel like we get through winter and people are just desperate, and then we get a few weeks of sun and we go,
it's not so bad, man.
UK's pretty good, actually.
Well, my colleague John, he hates the Edinburgh winters. So he goes to Lanzarote for 3 months and he hires an Airbnb. That's what he does. And he's done it for the last couple of years to try and overcome the Scottish winters.
Yeah, I mean, there's some proper winters. We went to Durham University, and that is a cold place. Like the wind around Durham, oh my God.
And then like the whole month of December, you can't drive to uni because like the snow's so deep. So the roads are done like.
You don't realise it's like a different country up north sometimes to how cold it gets. I mean, it's even, you notice a couple of degrees. Did you come down on the train today?
Yes.
You notice a couple of degrees, don't you? When you go
coming east.
Yeah.
You notice a couple of degrees when you leave God's country all the time.
Yeah. You cross the wall. And we've just got the aircon a couple of degrees higher than you. Yeah. Okay. What about then the other way around about extra contributions? So we talked there about taking the benefit early. I know some people are, can put more in. Is that right?
So
Buying years, maybe?
Yes. So there's a couple of ways, but most of the ones these days, and in general, it's what is known as added years. So in other words, going back to our example earlier of 20 years, and I'm saving up on a 1/60th basis, then I could obtain more years, okay? Because obviously it's a big advantage to me because it's, you expect to have a higher salary later in your life and towards retirement than you do when you're 35 or 40, as an example.
Buy them when they're cheap.
But yeah, so from that perspective, it used to be that you could buy a guaranteed pension. Most of them now are defined contribution basis. So in other words, you're just putting money into what is known as an additional voluntary contribution, an AVC pot. And the advantage of that might be that those might be cheaper than doing your own personal pension. Although at present in the marketplace, there's pressure on charges and so forth, and they've come right down, as far as that's concerned. The other, obviously, advantage of funding a personal pension plan, if limits allow, is that I can take that independently of my final salary scheme. So, for example, if I know I'm going to carry on working until I'm age 60 under my final salary scheme, I could potentially access my personal pension plan earlier after 2028 at 57, if that's what I wanted to do. Or I could go part-time or something of that nature, However, there are caveats there that need to be looked at, which is that if you take income, if you take tax-free cash, it's fine. But if you take income from your personal pension plan, then you're restricted on the amount that you pay.
Money purchase annual allowance.
The money purchase annual allowance. And there I was going to see MPPA, but I knew...
You're learning now.
Oh, I'm sharp now.
You love it, really.
Yeah.
You like the button. Everyone likes the button. Everyone wants it. So people sit there and go, you've not hit the button.
You mentioned earlier that I think before the government tried to, I can't remember who you said, tried to change the laws on DB pensions. One of our listeners wrote in, named John, can the government just change their mind and make them disappear?
So the employer is the one that would change the DB pension. So they might close the pension scheme down to what is known as future accrual. So I could issue a notice saying, right, with effect from the 31st of August this year, and there'll be certain things within the rules, okay? We are no longer allowing you to accrue benefits within that pension scheme. And there are various regulatory requirements that have to be gone through for that. And that is really, really important. And there's a whole list of, through a process that they have to go by, okay, to give notice and so forth. And then your pension would be paid up, as it's referred to, at that date. And that, what could then happen would be that from that date onwards, it would increase by inflation or something of that nature. And it all depends on what basis the scheme is wound up, as it's referred to. I can then replace that scheme with a money purchase scheme. And I would then turn around and say, right, on that basis, I'm now going to contribute 15% of your salary, pensionable salary, and I can define what salary means. So I can not include overtime.
Qualified earnings.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you think, stakeholder and employee workplace pensions and so forth. So from that perspective, it is really, really important. And I have great sympathy because, I've been in pensions now since 1987, okay? And
that's when I was born.
Well, there we are. See, I thought about it then. So from that... I've seen some drivel. There's, they talk about the speaking plain English and so forth, or Welsh or Scottish, whatever we want to talk. Okay, but in some of the wording and terminology and some of the paperwork that I see for clients, it's unbelievably complicated.
I called you Scottish before, didn't I? I realised you're Welsh.
You're joking.
No, that's what I said when you jumped over the wall. Like, I'm sorry to offend you.
No.
That's why when you said you come across, you come in, so I was like, he's going a weird way from
you said going east. Yeah, going east.
I was like, no, was like, holy
You
shit.
know the coffee you just drank there?
Yeah.
Was it a rum in it or something like that?
Yeah. I'm going to say yes. Because, sorry about that.
No, it's because I came across the Severn, the River Severn. That's what I meant.
Yeah. Well, I'm only saying it because people in the audience will be like, he said the wall. So, typical Englishman.
Thinks the whole world is England.
We're all united, guys. We love Wales, we love Scotland. But yeah, wow, we might have to try and cut all of that out, or I look like an idiot. But carry on, sorry. Carry on.
What were we talking about? Geography or something?
Yeah. No, let me have a think.
The change in the employer.
Oh, yeah, so their ability to just change the goalpost.
So the scheme would be wound up.
Yeah.
And then it all depends what the replacement scheme would be brought in. More than likely, it would be money purchase or defined contribution. And, it's quite simple because money purchase stands for what the money will purchase as far as an annuity is concerned. But now you don't have to buy an annuity. Years ago, you had to buy an annuity when you were 75.
Would you then be in two separate schemes? So
Correct.
You've got your old pot and your new pot.
That's correct.
And
so your old pot would be a defined benefit, final salary scheme, and potentially, let's just say, at the date the scheme was wound up, you would, let's just say for discussion purposes, it was 10 grand. That would increase each year by inflation. Okay, until a time in the future when you came to take those benefits, and that's what you would be paid. Okay, as an example. And then over here, your new pot, as you've described it, you've paid money into that over the years. Mm-hmm. So obviously, where I come from,
Scotland.
Deepest darkest.
You did say Edinburgh. You said Edinburgh. I'm thinking you said my business partner leaves Edinburgh. So I was like, oh, yeah, he's come all that way today. Okay, yeah.
But we work remote.
Yeah, okay.
So I work in Cardiff and he works in Edinburgh. And he's got a broad Welsh accent as well, but that's another thing.
Okay. Just confused everyone.
So the British Steel pension scheme. Okay, so British Steel closed the pension scheme and set up a brand new defined contribution scheme, okay, as an example. So various schemes want to wind up because they want to get rid of that liability because it's an open checkbook, okay? So the issue with certain scenarios is that potentially unions could be involved or, and they would be involved with the negotiation of what it is. Because as you said earlier on, okay, and it is a great way to describe it, the pension scheme is a deferred salary, basically. It's a salary that I'm going to pay you 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And the important thing is that that'll be guaranteed as long as I'm in existence, i.e. the employer. Now, there is a means by which that is protected, and that's known as the Pension Protection Fund. And the Pension Protection Fund takes on schemes that can't meet liabilities. In basically, there are various categories of that and so forth, okay? And I won't bore the audience with what takes place, but there is a government lifeboat scheme that does guarantee the payments in certain circumstances, but those will be, important to understand.
Do you think that provides a level of reassurance to people in the schemes now that in 20, 30, 40 years that they can rely on those schemes?
Well, to a certain extent, yes. But the point is, and one of the earlier questions was, who has these schemes now? Very few smaller employers have these schemes now.
One of the goals of personal finance is to take the money that we earn and to put it to work, so that one day we can hopefully stop working. But I often speak to company owners who have got plenty of money, quite large sums of cash, just sat in their business bank account doing absolutely nothing. So why not at least put that money to work? This is why I'm happy that we're working with Tide. They offer an instant access saver which I use as an account to generate interest on excess money for things like tax savings. New members can earn up to 4.22% AER variable for up to 6 months. I say up to because it depends on how much you deposit in your account, and the more you save, the higher the rate. You can get this deal, plus you can get £100 cash back if you fund your Tide Instant Saver account with £5,000 in the first 30 days, if you use code MAKINGMONEY. T's and C's apply. The code is MAKINGMONEY, all one word, or you can use the link in the description where you'll also find all of the offer and the full terms. The variable rate is correct as of the 8th of May 2025.
But do you think people within, say, the public sector can be confident that their schemes will exist and, like have that reassurance?
I think so, yes.
And what's clear there is that they can't really change the rules on the scheme as it is. They can more just say that scheme's now done and you're in a new one, so that you haven't got to worry that they're going to pull the rug from you.
Well, that's the interesting part, because to a certain extent, they haven't pulled the rug. They've just amended the basis.
They just make them worse or less generous.
Well, less generous, yeah. But equally, there's Liz Truss has got a lot to answer for in the nicest possible way. So if we just look at the NHS pension scheme for a moment, okay? So the old 1995 scheme, which was a final salary scheme, was basically, I will give you 1/80th for each year of service, okay, as a pension, and I'll give you 3/80ths as a lump sum at your normal retirement date. So all those people who joined the scheme back in prior to 2008, that's what basically.
If you were there for 10 years, you got 30 years worth.
You had 38.
Yeah, 38.
So 80th, yeah.
Yes,
so if you're on 80 grand, you'd have a lump sum of 30 grand and a pension of 10.
Yeah, okay.
At your retirement
Very
age.
nice.
Okay. However, they then changed that in the 2015 scheme so that it is now 1/54th. They couldn't make it even more complicated, could they? So it's 1/54th of that year's pension. So I described earlier on that pension then is put into a box, okay? And that box then has an increase each year by inflation. And then each year, that pension that you've earned is put into a box. And then at the end, 15 years down the road, okay, 15 boxes will be added up. And that's what your pension will be. And you see it every year on your statement, and it's in a line. So you'll have 15 each year, a pension will have been accumulated.
But you don't benefit from that effect of your income being high at the end of the year and uprating all of your pension years, basically.
But what it is that the government, in that particular example, increase each box of the pension that you've earned by consumer price index plus 1.5%. So when Liz and Kwasi, did that,
put their foot in it, as you
put
say.
their foot in it, or fouled up things, okay? Some people were crying, some people weren't, okay? In the NHS, the following year, that pension went up by 11.6%. That one pension. So if I earn £2,000, that pension now is now worth £2,200, give or take. And then every year, the £2,000 pension that I earned will have more inflation added onto it. But you don't have inflation on inflation. It's just the pension that gets inflation. But every box gets inflation added on every year. Okay? So if I'm earning, let's just say, £108,000 a year, I'm earning £2,000 a year of pension plus inflation. So after 10 years, I'll be guaranteed a pension of £20,000 if my salary doesn't change. But I've an inflation on those every year. So it is quite, on the one hand, it's quite generous. But the reason why they've reduced it is because, and extended the retirement age, is because under the old scheme, okay, I used to have a pension and a lump sum. Okay, under the new scheme, it's just a pension. So if I want to give up some of my pension to get a lump sum, tax-free lump sum, I have to give up £1,000 a pension to have £12,000 a lump sum. Now you might think, well, that's a no-brainer. But it isn't. Because how long are you going to live for? What's more important to you? That's the cast iron guaranteed £1,000 increasing each year by inflation. So what is it that you want compared to 12,000 here and now? So it all depends what people want. But the key thing is,
they don't make it easy for people, though, do they?
I
mean, you just explained that to us, and I'm a bit like, like trying to wrap my head around it, and people just trying to do their jobs. And they're like, oh, we're gonna fandangle your scheme into this new thing, and people are like, what the hell is going on?
I agree. And my daughter's in the NHS, she's trained to be an anaesthetist, and she says it's very, very confusing.
She knows how to knock people out, not crunch the numbers.
So she says I do that when I talk to people. That's another story. So from that perspective, it is really, really important to understand what you have.
Where can people, do you think, get that information about their particular scheme in a way that's digestible? do you think?
So the annual benefit statement, they should take a note of it, and generally it'll show what the difference is on an annual basis, the words that I use, what have you accrued? Okay, so there's an accrual rate. So the accrual rate is how much pension do you earn each year? So the example I've given, the 154th or 180th or 160th, that's the accrual rate, for want of a better description. But the key thing is to understand that the final, so as a 1995 definition is concerned, okay, so every year they show that you've earned that pension, okay, under the old 1995 scheme, but the final definition is the last 3 years of pensionable earnings. So, and a lot of people don't realise that. So they come to the end, and all the figures that they've been quoted before actually mean nothing, because it's the last 3.
Don't take a pay cut in those final years, or go part-time?
Absolutely, no. Part-time, it gets a whole-time equivalent.
Like prorated up?
Yeah.
But you want to get a little pay rise or something in those last 3 years.
Or a clinical excellence award or something of that nature. But
clinical
excellence award, CEAs.
That?
So those are pensionable bonuses for doing certain work for the hospital, something of that nature. That's the simplest way to describe it. But, the key point is a defined benefit is a very, very valuable.
In any shape, form, all of the schemes that exist are still great schemes.
Yeah, for certain individuals, and obviously with other individuals, they may want to take a different view, and that's understandable as well. But they've got to understand what it is that they potentially are going down the road of, and unfortunately, there have been a lot of scams in recent years. Horrible scams.
So I was going to say, why do you hear so much about people transferring out of DB schemes then? Is that part of the scams, or is it just an offer that they have to decide if they want it or not?
So pensions freedom came in and was announced back in 2015. And with the public sector, they said, we're going to allow pensions freedom, so you can take out whatever you want to from your defined contribution pot or your personal pension, okay? But with effect from April 2016, certain unfunded public sector schemes can't transfer out. So you can't transfer out to the NHS. You can't transfer out to the teacher scheme. But hang on, I pay money in monthly. What do you mean it's unfunded? Because the bill is picked up by us.
The taxpayer.
Taxpayer, paying on an annual basis. Basically, there isn't a fund as such.
There's no money.
Well, but it's all the government or the Treasury write out a check for all public sector pensions in payment. So what happened is that pensions freedom, as it was referred to, came along, and people didn't have to buy an annuity, as I mentioned earlier on. There was a tragic case back in the day whereby a farmer shot themselves when they were 74 years and 260 days, so that his wife could have the pension fund and not have to buy an annuity. There's tragic stories like that. So pension flexibility came along, and you were allowed to take out to the fund what you wanted. Okay. Previously, that wasn't the case. You were restricted on the amount that you could take out. So lots of people then turned around and said, oh, wow, I'd rather have the ability to take out 20,000 one year, then 30,000 the next year, then 20,000, then 30 or 40,000. I'd much rather that than that boring 10 grand a year guaranteed consumer price index increasing pension. I'd much rather have the 40, grand. So you saw a huge rush towards transferring out because of flexibility. So if you read suitability reports at the time, so why do you want to transfer out then? Oh, I want to transfer out for greater control or greater flexibility. Well, what does that mean? What does flexibility mean? Oh, well, I want to take out money as and when I want to.
Don't want to buy a car or...
Yeah, but I want to be able to vary the amounts that I withdraw. Okay, so it saw a huge increase in transfers post 2015. Now, what the problem is with transfer values is how they calculate it. What happens is that interest rate and gilt yields, okay, dictate really what, and give you a flavour for what transfer values are going to be. So when interest rates were down at towards zero, okay, transfer values were very, very high. And the peak was about 2019, there or thereabouts, okay? And you were seeing significant transfer values. Because basically, what it is, so if you asked a scheme for a transfer value, the scheme, what it does behind the scenes is it increases your pension at the date of leaving to your retirement date. So let's just say that you've got a £10,000 pension, okay, and you left in 2010, and your retirement date is 3 years in the future. So what the scheme actually then does is say, right, the present value of that now is 15 grand. So we're going to assume that inflation over the next 3 years is going to be 2% or 3%, and they decide what that is, okay? And they roll that forward and they say, right, in 3 years' time, the pension is going to be £15,500. So how much of a fund do we need to provide that person with a pension fund of £15,500? What dictates that? They're gilt deals. Okay, so gilt deals, when they're low, okay, you need more money to be able to buy that pension. But when they're high, like they are at the moment, when they're up around 5% compared to where they were down below 1%, I need less money. So what's happened over the last number of years is that transfer values have decreased. So those who took transfer values in 2018-19 might, on depending upon what type of pension scheme they were in, but I saw multiples of them 40. So I got
you might need over £1 million at 1% to get the 15k.
So I got 25 grand of a deferred pension, and I'm being offered, let's just for discussion purposes say £1 million. Okay, that's 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Okay, now that might only be 600,000 or 500,000. Okay, so now if I'm trying to demonstrate to you your plan, for retirement, that you want £25,000 a year or £20,000 a year, I want to try and show that you can last by investing that money with the charges, with other issues, to age 100. Well, if it's £1 million, there's a better chance. With £500,000, there's the stress testing and so forth that needs to be undertaken shows
some kind of cash flow modelling, Voyant or something like that. Yeah.
So the cash flow modelling doesn't prove sustainability of income, and that's one of the things that an IFA or a planner should look at for a client. So going back to the point about why there were so much transfers, because the transfer values
they were so good.
They were so good. Okay.
Because interest rates were low.
Interest rates were low.
In order to support a 15 grand a year income, they were only getting a 1% return. So they need a massive pot of cash. And they're basically saying, well, that's the value to us. So here's the cash. Whereas now it's like, well, we get 5%. So to kick out 15k a year, we need, a lot less cash. Yeah. So you get a lot less.
So what they then did, they discounted that back to the present day. And that's why transfer values were much, much greater back in 2019. It's quite an interesting index. It's called the XPS Affinity Index, which tracks transfer values. And previously it was up around there, for a £300,000 transfer for a 10 grand, whatever, and now it's down at around about, down half, if not less. It is quite amazing the impact that's had over the last few years. And so what's happened then? Apologies.
No,
what's happened then is that you've seen less people take transfer values because it can't be proven that it's in their best interest to do it. And that's one aspect of it. There are other aspects which, what do you want to do? If you came to me today and said, I want to look at potentially transferring my pension, my first question would be why? Then you give me an answer, and then I say why again. And then you give me a third answer, and they say, why again?
Vegas. Yeah. You just boil down to, I just want to blow it. Just give me the money.
Mexico.
Yeah. What is your plan?
Yeah.
Oh, I want control. Well, what do you mean you want control? What does that mean? You must have a plan. What don't you like about that guaranteed gold-plated pension? Tell me. It's the process that's the key thing here. It's not the destination. It's not the global equity fund that you want to go into or something, or whatever it might be. It is the process. And if you look at what's happened, sadly, over the last number of years with the increase in complaints over the period, it's all down to the process. The destination wasn't the issue. People wanted their new kitchens, wanted their new cars and so on. It's the process. And there was certain items that you must go through in accordance with the Financial Conduct Authority's requirements, and a lot of people didn't go through them. And that's why there have been so many complaints. And that is why so many people now no longer provide advice in respect of final salary schemes.
Is it true that pots over 30k, you have to get advice if you want to transfer them out?
So going back to the scam situation that we touched on earlier on, what happened was that the government brought in a requirement that the trustees of the scheme that are transferring the benefits have to obtain a declaration from a properly authorised, regulated individual that appropriate advice has been given to the member. Appropriate advice. That's not to say to transfer, okay? But it's what is referred to as a declaration for a Section 53E, it's called, okay? And the trustees must obtain that where £30,000 is the value, or greater than £30,000 is the value of what is referred to as safeguarded benefits, the guaranteed pension element. Now, I appreciate that the disappointing part might be, and you could turn around to me and say, but Pete, that's not really fair, because it's quite costly. Okay, yeah, it is.
How much is it?
It varies. So what our charge would vary between £5,000 to 1.5% of the transfer value, subject to a maximum of £15,000. And the other point about that is that there are two aspects to the process. One is what we call the shortened version, and what the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, I did mention earlier on, the FCA deemed to be abridged advice. So basically, that is an opportunity for me to examine with you the benefit of staying in that scheme. And at the end of my analysis, I can only look at the scheme. At the end of that analysis, I can only come up with two recommendations. Either A, you stay where you are, or B, I can't advise anymore and it's unclear, and you can move forward into full advice. However, if you move forward into full advice, I still can't guarantee that my recommendation would be anything different than stay where you are. So that is much cheaper. That's only £1,500. And it's not a requirement you have to provide this, but we believe at Expert Pensions Advice that is the key, that it gives you an opportunity to make an informed decision as to, actually, I'm barking mad thinking about transferring when I didn't realise what I had here, because you can't go back. That's the difficulty.
Once you're out, you're out.
Yeah, you're out. Yeah, and that's the difficulty with it. And when you start chatting about, we talked about the consumer price index earlier on. Okay, so inflation is the ravage. It's the burglar of retirement, because if my shopping trolley, am I allowed to mention any supermarkets, or we just say supermarkets, do we?
No, you can say one if you want.
I won't mention any Welsh ones or Scottish ones.
I was going to say, what ones do they have up in Scotland?
Tesco's. Anyone who hasn't had a cyber attack at the moment. Okay, so from a supermarket point of view, okay, what does inflation do? Okay, so my shopping trolley each week costs £100. Okay, if inflation is 5%, next year my DB pension has to a certain extent counteracted and may have increased and may have mitigated some of that 5% increase. Your defined contribution, Trump has opened his mouth because it's now gone 2 o'clock, okay? And the S&P 500 has now decreased, or it's gone down, okay? So your £500,000 fund has now gone down to 490, but you still need your £20,000. Or you can take the beer and the wine out of the shopping trolley and keep it at £100. What are you going to do? Are you going to take the beer and the wine out of the shopping trolley, or are you going to take more money, or are you going to take more money out of your pension fund?
Yeah.
Whereas in the defined benefit, to a certain extent, that is mitigated. That is
Purchasing power is protected.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that people don't understand. And that's what we go through. And we literally break expenditure down into active retirement, middle retirement, and late retirement. And we cash flow all the way through to 100. So basically, if you came to me today, okay, the fee would be payable whether I say transfer or not transfer. There's still a fee payable. Whereas historically, the situation was that I'd only get paid if I transferred.
So they incentivized.
There was a conflict, or they deemed it to be a
conflict of interest.
Yeah, big conflict of interest.
So you do like 3 meetings, and then if you told them all don't transfer, you wouldn't make anything.
Yeah, correct.
But if you told them all to transfer, you would get paid for all those meetings.
Yeah.
That seems a little bit not the most honest or transparent way to do it.
And transport, that's a great word, transparent, yeah. And now it's what is known as non-contingent. So you straight up front, you know what you're on the hook for. But that's why we believe that the shortened version or the abridged advice is such a great way, because you can exit. So I'll give you an example, okay? Going back to our Tesco's, other supermarkets are available. So I was sat virtually with a couple of years ago, and the gentleman had a pension with one of the big oil companies, and it was increasing each year by a maximum of 7%. And we already knew what the inflation was 3 months hence in December when as an example, okay, and it was going up by 7%. Okay, so his 20 grand a year was suddenly going to be, gone up by 1,400 quid the following year, as an example. Okay, his wife turned around and said, "Oh, I didn't realise that." And you find that so often people don't realise what it is that they've got. They think they've won the lottery, and they haven't. We say to people, one thing we can make sure of, okay, is if you do transfer, your fund will drop down.
Yeah, because what I think people don't really internalise is, let's say you get £10,000 a year for the whole of your retirement, inflation adjusted, or you could take a pot and you could take 20k a year. At one point, the 10k might overtake the 20k. In terms of they think the 20k is like a static almost, probably not adjusting for inflation. The purchasing power is getting cut every year,
or it's not adjusting for drops in this investment market.
Yeah, in the stock market.
In stock market.
And that's assuming that you're even going to put it in the stock market. Most of these people will have it just sat in their bank accounts, or they'll spend a load in the first year going on crazy holidays, and the pot soon becomes 250, right?
And the point you made earlier on, in fairness, is right, okay? Because of your investment time horizon, you can go, into a greater equity content, because you're not under any pressure. No. Now, some people then take a different view to their ISA investments or their general investment account investments, other investments, compared to their pension fund, which has got 20, 30 years to go because of the increase in the retirement age. It's a completely different scenario, and it is really, really important. And we see it so many times. I had it this morning now before I left. I had an email from a client that said, the transfer value back in 2020 was 230. It's now only 160. That's irrelevant. What's important is, what's the value of the pension? Well, how does that pension fit in with you? Forget about the transfer value. We don't look at the transfer value. What we look at is, what is your plan? Is your plan achievable by you receiving that guaranteed pension? If that's the case, that is for you. That is what you want. That is what you need. And I do understand that some people may think that they're not going to live a long time. But the chances now of somebody living to 100 is 1 in 4. It's extended out quite a
Told you,
significant.
mate. We're living forever.
You're going to 120.
Yeah,
He just wants to compound and invest forever.
Yeah.
He's going to still be in global equities. And,
Yeah,
115.
100%. I'll de-risk at 119.
Can I go 120%? Please?
Yeah.
But that's the one. And then finally, yes, okay, if there is ill health, then, I understand why somebody may want to, go down that route. And that would be an understandable reason.
Or even like a terminal illness.
Yeah.
Do you get those kind of cases?
Yes,
and people just like, rip the money out, I need it now, I want to spend
well,
it. Kind of thing.
Not so much that, but they want to put it in place because their spouse,
Their loved ones,
their loved ones would receive an element. Whereas, one thing we didn't touch on.
Well, then the guaranteed income is 50%.
Yeah.
And it's,
and there's a definition of spouse.
Okay.
Okay. And that's the other one thing to check. Okay. So, if you're not married or in a civil partnership, okay, don't assume that your spouse, inverted commas, what you may think is your spouse, would automatically receive a pension from the DB. Likewise, I can fully understand why somebody might go down the route of investigating transfers if they have sufficient assets, if they are happy to, and they understand what potential risks are involved, and they have some sort of investment experience. That is very, very helpful indeed. There is no what we don't want. We want people to make informed decisions. And that's the key to it all. So there's lots of different things to look at. However, the key thing for the individual is that if for any reason whatsoever, okay, you want to keep that defined benefit, don't be fooled if you get a phone call or if you get an email saying, "Oh yeah, we got a great idea for you, and you can invest in car parks in at airports and so forth," because those are the scams.
I had clients in the past when I've told this story before, but they would come to me and be like, "Oh, I've cashed in my DB scheme and I'm looking at investments," and we were selling off-plan properties, and like, "Oh, I'm looking at buying a car parking space in Dubai," and I was younger then, but I remember thinking, this doesn't sound right. Like they've given up this kind of final salary thing and they're buying car parking spaces in Dubai with it.
With regards to the scams, just like for our listeners, are pension scams normally people call you out the blue? You get a cold call and they say, "Oh, look, we've got this great investment idea for you. You can make great returns. This is the returns last year. How much is in your pension?" Or, "We know you have a pension." Is that normally how it works, or are there more like high level, complicated ones?
Spot on. So a couple of years ago, my wife had started receiving brown envelopes offering, or you can now access your pension. And the only pension she had was an NHS pension, but it was because of her age. So they would
just
have
blanket everyone at that age.
Marketing employee. It's unbelievable what can take place out there, and it's so
They're
so
still
sad.
life though. The scams. They're not. They still exist.
They still exist, and people are still. The regulations are trying to tighten things, and there is great onus now on trustees to do a number of checks. So the example that you gave there, which is a great example about buying a car park in Dubai or something, if there's an element of an overseas investment, then the trustees are bound to take it on to another level of investigation. If any of our listeners did get a phone call, go onto the FCA website, and there are various videos on there which show what to expect from a process. They are very, very helpful, and they're only a couple of minutes long.
So they explain to you what's normal within your kind of world of DBs.
Of DB, what to expect within a process.
So if some guy's like pressuring you to transfer it to him, you'd be like, "That's not normal."
And now the trustees, when they're transferring, invariably now send out a questionnaire, and one of the questions on it is, "Did you receive a cold call?"
So final question then.
Is that it?
Yeah. You've been talking.
I can go back to
Scotland.
across the.
A long old train journey.
Back to the Highlands. Yeah. So I would just say, for anyone with a DB scheme, what I think I know what you'll say, but I want to ask the question: what's the one piece of advice that you'd give them when approaching it?
So going back to what we've chatted through, okay, understand the value of that guaranteed income. And don't look at the transfer value. Have a look at what else you've got available to fall back on in the event of something going wrong. That is one thing, and I would caveat that further, whereby if you do get cold calls, look to see, first of all, if the individual that rang you up, take their full name, look on the FCA register. So on the FCA register, you can look at the client, look at the IFA on an individual basis and see the firm that he works for. But look, don't get scammed. Don't get scammed. Please don't.
So go on to me and be honest, how was that for you?
I mean, I was pretty clueless about DB pensions.
You still are now.
A little bit, yeah.
I think one thing was like the valuation of them is so hard, isn't it? Because there's just so many variables. It's very specific. Our sister company, Financial Interest, has put together a free pension decoder. We'll leave that down below for you so that you can have a look at that and hopefully try and figure out what your specific DB pension is worth.
Down below.
There's nothing there.
There's nothing there.
There's nothing there.